of astronauts change the world. They ride the biggest rocket ever built to the moon. It's the culmination of more than 10 years of space pioneering and the foundation for more than 4 decades of exploring worlds beyond our own. This is the story of our greatest adventure. In the high desert of California, NASA tests an experimental rocket plane, the X-15. They want to put a man into space, and they're in a hurry.
Rockets were powering aircraft to higher and higher speeds. The X-15 had enough energy to zoom to altitudes above the atmosphere.
The X-15 flies so high, pilots experience weightlessness and look out into the darkness of space. But even at 600,000 horsepower, it would need to fly 4 times its top speed to put a man into orbit. The Soviet Union holds an early lead in the space race, launching the first unmanned satellite to orbit the Earth.
On October 4th, 1957, when Sputnik went into orbit, people were so upset. They said, these people can't build a refrigerator. How can they get into orbit? How did this happen?
To beat the Soviets, NASA must launch a man into Earth orbit. Only rockets can go fast enough, more than 17,000 miles per hour. They call the program Project Mercury and rally a team of determined young scientists and engineers to figure out how to fly a military missile with a man on top.
Most of us came in from aircraft flight test. We knew nothing about rocketry, we knew nothing about spacecraft, we knew nothing about orbits.
Gene Kranz joins the flight director's team in NASA's earliest days.
So it was a question of learning to drink from a fire hose. We had to learn all about trajectories. I'd never heard the term retrofire, coming on down from orbit, getting the spacecraft back home.
No man has ever survived a vertical blastoff on top of a rocket. The risks are extremely high. At first, even stuntmen are considered for the job.
There were suggestions they'd take people like Evel Knievel or race drivers or something like that. And then President Eisenhower just said he'd rather have it be military test pilots.
Test pilots are trained to operate and analyze experimental flying machines. 110 of the military's best pilots qualify. NASA selects the top 7.
For these ladies and gentlemen are the nation's Mercury astronauts.
The Mercury 7 astronauts become instant celebrities. The press follows their every move.
You knew these guys. You lived with these guys. You socialized with them. They were the story. Wallace Schirra, a man of detail, made the best textbook flight of them all. Alan Shepard, extremely smart. Scott Carpenter, the first scientist astronaut. Ordo Cooper, the best pilot of the bunch. Deke, nobody messed with. Great human being in every way. Gus Grissom, engineering savvy, quiet intellect. John Glenn, civilized man, probably the most level-headed.
Glenn is already a public figure after making the first cross-country supersonic flight. But even for a Marine, astronaut training is intense.
They ran us through every check they knew how to run. I think every medical test they knew how to do on the human body. It was a very thorough going through.
first astronauts safely into space, NASA designs a pressurized capsule. The one-man spacecraft replaces a nuclear warhead as the payload for a Redstone missile. But they're not ready to launch men into space.
I saw a lot of rockets launched. I'd say that somewhere between 30 and 40% of them failed. A lot of them came up off the pad and went the opposite direction. Some of them got halfway off the pad and blew up. Some of them got to 10,000 feet and turned the other way and blew up.
The whole thing crumbled and blew up. It looked like an atomic bomb went off almost over our heads.
We got a big kick out of watching the Mercury astronauts. It was great looking at their eyes.
We're looking at this thing and looking at each other and deciding we want to go back and talk to the engineers a little more before we go further.
Engineers make the rockets more reliable for manned flight. But doctors still aren't convinced the man on top will be able to function in the weightlessness of space.
There was grave doubt in about 98% of the medical community that the man could perform a task when flying at zero gravity, that he would have trouble seeing, that he would have trouble swallowing, he would have trouble breathing, he would have trouble talking. We had to prove to the medical community that man would survive in the first place, and secondly, that he could do a task.
It's not made public, but John Glenn, Alan Shepard, and Gus Grissom are on NASA's short list to be America's first man in space.
We're all very competitive. We want to get those first flights.
January 1961. The rocket and capsule are finally ready to fly. But none of the astronauts are happy about NASA's choice. A specially trained chimpanzee named Ham will fly the next Mercury mission.
There was a group of professional naysayers in Washington who insisted that we do some more work to prove a 5-minute flight wouldn't be fatal to man.
NASA's medical team sends Ham as a final test that man can function in zero-G. The astronauts fear they're losing precious time.
None of them liked it. Alan was fighting to get rid of the chimpanzee. He didn't want the chimpanzee to take up a rocket, to take up a seat.
January 31, 1961. Ham blasts off on a suborbital mission into space.
2, 1, 0.
While weightless, Ham's put through a series of tests and performs well. Physically, he's unaffected by zero-G. Ham splashes down off target. He's fatigued, dehydrated, but generally in good shape. His mission proves man can function in space. But doubts remain about the reliability of the rockets. And they still don't know who will fly first.
It had been a big mystery for a long time. Who's going to fly first?
The director of the Manned Spacecraft Center finally reveals his choice.
Bob Gilruth came to our office, and he named Al for the first ballistic flight.
Alan Shepard was chosen to be the first because he was considered to be the smartest of the 7 astronauts. They felt if Alan on the first one, if anything went wrong, he was more apt to be able to analyze or fix or do or get it out of it.
After more tests and more delays, NASA still hopes to put the first man in space.
While there was certainly competition in the group, nevertheless, when it came time for a flight, we all worked together as closely as anybody could ever work together.
We have done everything we know how to do to make this as safe as we can make it. We're done with all the tests, so we stand around and look at each other one last time and ask, okay, are we really ready to light this candle? Eventually, the answer to that has to be yes.
Alan Shepard's